I think a lot of people are thinking about it from the angle of like syncing between devices. But like the really interesting thing that I think like nobody's like talking about quite yet, but it's like when you solve sync between devices, like what you accidentally also solve is like sync between components on the same page. Like sort of as a side effect of that.
That has a real world consequence in the return on investment on a given build or an operational capability that will degrade future returns on investment.
You could draw circles around this not only in the consumer context around calendars, but you could draw circles around this in manufacturing and in energy and in, telecom, right? Where like there's all these like various shapes of data that are somewhat similar, but there's just never been a way for them to interoperate and agree on a common model,
For a drone to be useful, and sensors to be useful, right? They need to be like actually hooked up to stuff, right? And I think there's this like problem in general of the government. They have like a zillion sensors, like defense specifically. Like they have so many sensors, but they're like not like pointing to anything, and they have to build like an automations layer into the product. And it's like, cool, mine is just adding a button that says create automation, and my job ends there, right? Like very carefully, like only expose, like I don't want to expose like my whole ontology to be able to be readable by the public. I want to expose like that very narrow query.
What about a demo?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I heard we're gonna do our first live demo on Code and Connor here. So
let's go. Demo gods be with us. Let's go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Code and Connor podcast. My name is Connor Deeks, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around Palantir, the tech, the company, the community. We'll also be discussing insights on other companies, things happening in the world of AI, of data, of consulting, of investing, and any meaningful topic that requires attention. The focus of today's episode is working in offline environments and ontology native data capture. We're joined today by Rob Fidler. Rob is the general manager of Valinor Streamline. Prior to joining Valinor, Rob spent 5 years as a forward deployed engineer at Palantir, working on projects with a variety of civilian agencies, such as the FDA. He also spent 2 years as a software engineer at Chapter, building their core technology layer. Rob, welcome to Code and Connor.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Welcome. Great to have you, man.
First topic on the docket, who is Valinor? Let's unpack the mystery behind what a constellation of mission-aligned products means.
Sweet. Yeah, I think it's maybe best to just focus on like answer it by sort of like what problem it's trying to solve. And I think the best way I can put it is like there are a lot of sort of problems, mission sets in particular in the government space that kind of go unmet because they're not big enough for like the VC market to kind of capture. Because, VC, you need to sort of have these sort of giant mega home run outcomes. And so you're sort of, if you're working in the government space in like a sort of VC funded company, you're kind of incentivized to go only after these like massive programs and not sort of, I don't know, called small to medium size sort of problems. So Valinor is sort of trying to solve that problem by having the realization that kind of the financials are kind of what drive what gets worked on here. And so trying to create a new sort of capital structure to be able to actually go after those mission sets. So sort of centralize all the sort of like very costly parts of working with the government. So around like clearances and procurement processes and like sales cycle time and contracting and just sort of all this complexity that you need to actually operate with the government, and sort of amortizing that across lots of sort of just like lean product companies that can kind of then actually afford to go after these sorts of small to medium sized problems where like, again, there might be all these sort of like critical gaps, but again, just like not the right capital structure to actually solve them. So that's kind of what Valinor is trying to do.
I love that. And any way that we can get more startups or companies with innovative ideas that can serve government agencies and the DoD is a win for America. I think that's a great way to drive innovation and probably cost down overall for a lot of these agencies.
There's kind of comps in other spaces for this. Like in biotech, there's kind of like a bit like, they have these sort of holding companies that spin up individual sort of companies for individual molecules. I think there's like some other examples we've looked at in other spaces, but again, there's sort of comps in other industries, but not anything like this in like the like government tech ecosystem yet. So we're sort of bringing that idea to that space. So Valinor is sort of like actually starting these individual companies. And so we have, I think, 5 right now. So like they're there's Streamline, the product we're going to talk about today. And the other 4 that I think are all announced at this point, you can see on the website, are Condor is another one that's like a drone company. Another one is Harbor. So it's like a military medical hospital in a shipping container. Or Reflex products, that's like smart glasses that like have all the compute on board. Some AI stuff that you would want to do built in. And then also our Dispatch products, that's like a drone charging station that you can sort of like embed into other larger like vehicles or things like that.
You span the world of atoms and bits here.
Doing a lot of different stuff right now. Yeah.
Walk us through a bit of the history, or how'd you start Streamline, or how'd you get connected to Valinor?
Yeah. So I had worked with Julie, the CEO, and Catherine McCanney, who's head our operations here. So I'd worked with them at Palantir on a variety of the sort of US government stuff that I'd been working on. I kind of got wind of what they were doing and then got in touch sometime last summer, and then ended up coming on board later in the year. Streamline was sort of came out of like, I honestly had just like I had this running list on my phone for a while of just like, what are like SaaS businesses I want to like rip off and like re-platform on Foundry instead of, I've always been frustrated with this idea of like the way that SaaS works now, where you have, just like the data lives in 100 different places and you try to stitch it together. And, every SaaS product has like an integrations tab on their website. And it's like, okay, like nobody's asking the question of like, very obviously like the combinatorics of all of those 100 products integrating with each other just explodes very quickly. So I've just always like been very annoyed by that. So I've sort of had, the idea for a while of like what would it look like to like, again, re-platform some of these types of products like on top of like a sort of single store, like a Foundry. And so like the original pitch was kind of just like Foundry native Typeform was kind of like what I was imagining. And so that was how it kind of came about. Like I was like, I feel like this will have a lot of like, sort of use cases in the government space in particular. And I had seen, working across at Palantir, and then also just like dealing with lots of these like intake form type things at the startup that I was working on, of just like this stuff is still just like super annoying to throw together. Pitch this product as just like, hey, I actually didn't know what I was going to do at Valinor first. So it was like, maybe I'm going to do internal stuff or whatever. But I was just like, oh, I think probably the most valuable thing to do is just start one of these companies, because we didn't have any of them yet. And so that was the idea I pitched. We started working on it, and it started, started like shopping around and talking to customers. And that's kind of what led us also to a lot of this like mobile offline stuff, was just like talking to customers. And like, I think that's just where we saw a lot of like, we would bring it up and the people would be like, yeah, but can it do the like on a phone and offline?
There's the PWA experience.
Yeah, exactly. So we were hearing that a lot. So that's how we kind of got driven in that direction as well. So
I definitely I've been very bullish on re-platforming on Foundry for a long time, because number one, it's like you can compete with new business models at that point. So like if I install a marketplace application on a customer's Foundry stack, my investment is only in the software layer, and the data never leaves the 4 walls of the customer, and I pay for none of the compute cost, right? And that is insanely valuable today, like especially with AI. When you start layering AI workloads, those are some of the most expensive workloads you can run.
Yeah, not having to do that was like part of that was exactly the idea. It's just like the cost structure of a business like this can just be so radically different. That's why honestly it's like a better fit for like a Valinor, where it's like you want these lean businesses, right? It's like my cost structure is so different because, like you said, exactly, I don't need to build usage-based pricing. I don't need to build SSO and it's better for the customer too, because it's integrated into their thing. It's like, this like inversion of SaaS, right? Where like normally SaaS is like you send data to vendor and it like flips it on its head, right? And it's like vendor sends code to customer.
We are a tiny company. That's our distribution model too, for like most of the software that we're building. And what's crazy is we can like do things like offer things for free that no other, even if you were a large SaaS company, there's no way you could absorb the cost hit, So like as a disruptive business model, it's just a giant baseball bat.
Totally. No, I think this is like my like life's mission is to make this like how software gets, like keep driving at this idea. And, I think the thing that companies are going to be resistant to some extent is like buyers are like smart and they don't want to like have Palantir eat all their margin. And so I think there's going to be like, that's the kind of challenge. And so it's like almost how do you create like some layer in the middle where like, what is the like web standards for like data, if that makes sense? Like, where, you can have like, everyone can kind of build applications and components in a way that they're sort of like can be deployed against like whatever operating system and kind of just work. And I think like it's a lot of the ideas that Foundry has sort of like circled around with like, we've had like object relational systems forever, but I think like the sort of like interfaces concept is like a really
actually low key important, like bringing polymorphism to like the database layers.
You can build a bigger ecosystem on that, and create network effects at that point.
If I'm sitting in a CEO's chair or a COO and someone comes to me and says, we can chop your Salesforce spend to near zero and we can chop another core system cost to near zero, and there's just some level of vendor lock, I'm probably going to take the margin boost there.
It's just a small incremental cost over your Foundry spend, potentially, So it's like, but to Rob's point, the question becomes, does Foundry eat the margins of the SaaS companies trying to deploy these things?
Not even just the margin of the SaaS company, right? Like the company operating the business too, right? It's like if you get so deep, not like, oh, I'm so dependent on Palantir. Like I think it's like a natural thing you'll have to see play out. And I think so. Anyway, I think something I'm interested in is like what's this like middle layer where it's like you can, we have where we can write product code in a way that it like just expresses, you express the data requirements of product code, whether that's like read and write, and then be able to like deploy those like components or full apps sort of against like, a Foundry, but like, maybe something else eventually. And it's almost like, again, I'm sort of getting this like web standards for data kind of thing where it's like, again, Foundry can be like Google Chrome, whatever, but it's like, I think like having that credible exit of like, like sort of another thing you can like deploy the component or app against, I think will be like important for like that kind of ecosystem to actually really, really kind of blow up. But
agreed. Yeah. There's also been like a need to solve for, like you touched on it earlier, we need a way to solve for performant Foundry apps. And so like part of it is caching, part of it is, this sort of layer that can handle like progressive web app style stuff where it can do the sync between client and server and manage occasionally connected clients and the problems that, revolve around that. We've had technologies like Meteor.js in the past that attempt to solve this. Even going back to Flash actually, and Flex from Adobe back in the day actually had a really good solution for this in Flash Media Server. That middle layer you're talking about could also potentially be like the thing that hosts consumer applications, like consumer apps that require these really low latencies. Today, that's probably been mostly Vercel. That's where I've deployed most of my public-facing apps that use the OSDK that are built on top of Foundry. But that integration is a little rough. Like it's I'm always reinventing security, and there's a lot of pain around like just deploying every app that I need to do something with Foundry such that it can be publicly accessible. I think also in the startup community, they've struggled a little bit because like service accounts aren't available to the dev stacks in Foundry. So there's been this challenge around like how do developers take advantage of public facing things at all if they can't do it in their dev stacks? What are the use cases you're seeing for public applications that need to communicate with the Foundry backend? Things like event planning or webinar registration, user sign up workflows, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good sort of use cases for the product Streamline that we're building and again was types of thing I was thinking about of just like, and again, seeing this across government customers, seeing this like at the startup I was working at where we would do these sorts of like intake processes and just like, it's just like still a headache to throw these things together, regardless of what your like operational system is, whether it's like a Foundry or you have like your own Postgres thing, you build your own operational layer on Wicca, whatever it is. Most of these like, you have these like form builder types of products that, sort of solve this problem to some extent. If you're using one of those, like with, again, you're a Foundry or whatever operating system, you still have to like do all this like, on top of, again, all the downsides that we talked about before of like it being this separate SaaS thing, you have to still like, you're going to have all this work of like integrating it into your, however the data is coming in, right? Both like, the writes are coming back in some way that like, you're going to have to like pipe it into your thing. And like the reads are going to, it's you're manually wiring up like API calls or whatever, right? It's not like you can't actually like leverage in any real way the sort of like all the work you've done like on that side of like creating these objects and relationships between each other to actually like build out these workflows.
So I know that Ontology does user registration in a public facing manner, but they had to integrate all this stuff together, including the SSO provider, and like do all, it's a pretty complicated integration in Foundry. And then you have like webinar registration. You could think in the real estate context of like property showings,
Like one of the other examples I looked at when I was like doing this is just like car dealerships, right? It's like every company has these sorts of intake. Any organization or company doing anything like has these sorts of like, I need to poke a hole and get data from the public in some way. But my car dealer, I remember I was like looking at this product originally, and I was like, I needed to like fill out like a I do a service appointment or something, right? Like that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, definitely targeting like all those sorts of use cases, just trying to make it like super easy to spin those up. And we talked before. I think you had a good word of like those sorts of problems just warrant like a categorical solution. Those are exactly the use cases we're kind of trying to target with the sort of like public facing part of the
Connor's got his favorite, which is Calendly. I think you called this out the other day.
Oh, yeah.
They're like a $3 billion company, I think, that just shares calendar information.
Calendly is my biggest, like, it's like a symptom of the way that we build software. Of
Right,
like,
exactly. It's not actually solving the problem. It's just making the pain a little less.
it's basically a limited, it's like, I look at that $3 billion as just like, man, we like the fact that they can, that's like, there's that much value in like that thing is like crazy, right? Where it's like the actual, like, I think the way that you like, the way that it should work is like there should literally be a like open source like literally React component. It's like, again, the problem is because like the way we build apps, it's like we sort of solved this like composition at like the UI layer with like React, but we haven't solved the composition at like the data layer quite yet. And so it's like you need to, and it actually relates to the sync thing that we were talking about before in like a real way, because like a lot of people are like thinking about this sync problem right now. Like there was like a conference last week even around like this like sync it's becoming this like thing that people are talking about. But I think a lot of people are thinking about it from the angle of like syncing between devices. But like the really interesting thing that I think like nobody's like talking about quite yet, but it's like when you solve sync between devices, like what you accidentally also solve is like sync between components on the same page, like sort of as a side effect of that. And that's the kind of thing that actually lets you build like interoperable like data components and apps, right? Because you could have like a data driven like calendar component that is sort of like written almost in like the abstract of like an interface of like it's creating a calendar. It knows it's creating this like calendar shaped event and it's loading calendar shaped events. And so when that thing like creates a calendar shape event, there's some like engine that is basically like cool mapping that to like whatever other components on the page are requesting a calendar shaped thing. And they might be like requesting it in like a different, like in a more concrete sense, right? Like maybe it's like a maintenance appointment or something, right? And so the data would then get mapped to that thing, but then like in real time, right, I should be able to like update this component over here, like the calendar thing. And then this other component that was written with no knowledge of the other component should be able to like automatically be able to like just interoperate with the other component, right? You see this in Palantir to some extent in Workshop, right? It's like a sort of underrated reason of why Workshop is like good is because like you're not left to like do that plumbing yourself, because and like every like Workshop plugin is like doesn't know about every other Workshop plugin and how to like update it. It just like sort of like it's like, oh, I did some sort of write to this thing, and so like I need to invalidate these queries. It's very coarse grained. Like it's not like the best version of this by any means, but it works, right? And it's like it is the reason you can have like all these Workshop, but it's the reason Workshop works the way it does, and you're not sitting there and like writing all this manual invalidation code that you normally do when you like write a front end app with the sort of like traditional methods that we have.
It does agree. Like there's some assumptions that it agrees on some of the foundational aspects of the data that's the data model that's used. So like object sets, for example, are a precondition for Workshop to be able to work with the data at this stage, which has a certain underlying API that it expects, across all object types. But here's an interesting part to make this more concrete. Like Connor, I think you're familiar with some of the challenges we face within enterprise to try and promote interoperability in Foundry solutions, right? So like, how does Foundry solution A interop with Foundry solution B? And you often get like, oh my gosh, these groups have made two ontologies. How do you make them a unified ontology, right? And that's part of this problem. But maybe you could explain a little bit in concrete terms, like within the enterprise, what are the challenges around like them trying to unify data concepts such that they can have like interoperability? And then we'll bring it back maybe to a little bit what Rob is talking about.
Yeah, so we work with clients that deal in the same nouns and verbs conceptually, but then define those in completely different ways, such that you have two ontologies that might have different functionality that's delivering some type of task performance or operational capability that should have had a similar definition and design in the ontology, but ultimately don't. What that then requires is two ontologies, two sets of people to manage them, two business groups that can't communicate, and then you can't re-leverage that same investment again and again to like bring two parties together to deliver more and more things. That has a real world consequence in the return on investment on a given build or an operational capability that will degrade future returns on investment, which is really important, right? If you can't build something that can interoperate with future capability, you've kind of thrown away some of the benefit that you would have had. And you can do that correctly in Foundry, but a lot of times teams just don't know how it works. Like when we talk about interfaces, Dorian, you're the only one that's bringing it up.
I think I'm the only one bringing up ontology interfaces right now. It's like a really weird concept to everyone. It's like, but it's like the key value. It's like the key thing to unlock this problem of like, no one's ever really been able to establish a universal data model. Like bringing it back to the Calendly thing, it's like no one's ever been able to universally agree on what a calendar looks like. And it's because the definitions are too shallow. There's some snowflakey definition of it over here in Microsoft where they have some concept of a thing that doesn't exist in, you know, Google Calendar or whatever. And so it's like this example of why no universal data model can be agreed upon. But with interfaces, you could actually bridge this gap, right? Because what you're really saying is there's a minimum viable shape that my system can interop with. So instead of Calendly, where like I have to build this, you know, centralized single thing that knows how to unify these things, if I publish a data model, like an interface model that basically says, if you want to work with my system, you must expose data in this shape. I don't care what else you have in there, but you need this minimum viable shape, and then my system can interop with your system. And now we solve this in a distributed manner, because if you have like a system that essentially can process the data shapes, you could use that anywhere, right? It becomes a categorical solution to any kind of calendar operations you'd ever want to build as a developer that could be exposed through this interface shape. And I think that same thing exists like across the enterprise. It's really, you could draw circles around this not only in the consumer context around calendars, but you could draw circles around this in manufacturing and in energy and in, you know, telecom, right? Where like there's all these like various shapes of data that are somewhat similar, but there's just never been a way for them to interoperate and agree on a common model, you know?
Yeah, it's something people have obviously been trying to solve like forever. I mean, you go back to like all the like domain-driven design literature and the
I have a great book on it in my house.
It's like it's obviously something like people have been trying to do like forever. And to your point, maybe this is Connor, to your point of like even if you can get people to agree on like the interface, it's like cool. Maybe they still already like went and made two different object types or whatever, and so you're still gonna have to figure out like how do I reconcile these things. But I think at least it still at least gives you the tools to like, okay, once people do sort of like realize that hey, these are the same thing, like, and we can like, you know, unify the data in some way, it still lets people like speak their own language like within their individual. So I mean, it still requires work, but it gives you the tools to be able to at least do that. And you know, I think it goes a bit further than just, you know, there's an interesting project called, I don't know if you guys follow like Ink and Switch at all. It's like, I think it's like an Oxford lab. I think it's like, you know, like Martin Kleppman, he has like the designing data intensive applications book that everybody reads, the one with the like the pig, the pig or whatever on the front.
Oh, it's an O'Reilly book or whatever.
Yeah, the O'Reilly book. Yeah. But they had a thing that they published a couple of years ago, and they have this idea of like you can actually like interfaces in Foundry you can almost think of as like a degenerate version of this thing. It's almost like a bigger abstraction where it's like the thing that you need is to be able to have these like bi-directional lenses is sort of the idea. And you know, in like the Cambria model, they have more than just like interfaces are basically the same, this like lens concept, but with the only lenses that you have available are like property renames. And like Cambria is more like trying to give you also other things of like a cast type or, you know, whatever, so like math or, you know, sorts of these operations you could do that are like, they have to be bidirectional. But there's like more of them than just like property rename, but it's sort of the same concept. And I think out of the Cambria idea came out of more like the things that Ink and Switch does, which is they're really into this like local first sort of software. And these like malleable software of like, how do I make my own like sort of tools?
So it's like type conversion, and like, do they have a concept of like bindings for functions? Like if the data also was like an ontology object and you could do functions?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's functions. I think it's just like data bindings. Yeah, it's trying to allow you to do that sort of like data remapping. And it's funny, like Palantir, like actually even like it's another example of like they have like two versions of everything. Like in like there was an internal version that they made and the like external version. And it's almost like the internal version of it is like you do something super similar to interfaces when you do ontology schema migrations. Like it's actually realizing that like that data remapping and like schema migrations is like actually kind of two sides of the same thing. You're basically doing the same thing in the schema migration framework, right? Is like you're either like renaming properties or you're like, the point is inevitably you're mapping like one schema to another schema.
Just to kind of bring it full circle, like if you can effectively produce interfaces that can do bindings, one of the interesting things is if you make this layer in the middle, right, that can sort of, it's not necessarily the software running in Foundry, it's this integration layer. If you think about it in terms of like server objects, like in the gaming world, there's server objects, and server objects have state and behaviors, and they're responsible for like sort of keeping track of the state of the world, and they keep all the clients in sync. But they're like these little mini processing engines, you know? And you could imagine like if you had business logic and sync capability in this new middle layer, you could actually compose applications by composing data, you know, which is kind of what we do in the ontology today. But it'd be really neat to see, like in the context of this middle layer, like, oh, well, rather than having to necessarily start from zero, if I map my interface definitions in my ontology to this middle layer that contains all the server objects that can perform both like synchronization, but business logic and behavior, you could start to solve problems categorically, like user registration, right? Or some other workflow, you know, that essentially could work off a common definition of what does user registration look like. And then in your stack, you could add all the snowflakey behaviors on the back end. You know?
Totally. And I think there's like different parts of, again, it's coming from the same people that are working on like sync stuff. I think there's like a couple promising solutions around like what would it look like to, again, like have almost like a standard language that we write like product code in and then be able to like bind it to different whatever. It doesn't really matter what the backend is. But what I'm probably most bullish on right now with relation to Foundry is I don't know if you guys have seen this like TanStack DB project, and they just had a blog post the other day where they sort of pushed out, I've been like tracking it as like potentially it's going to be a good thing for this, but they just recently sort of merged all their stuff around like query driven sync. So where like you don't need to actually like sync, like it almost does. They have like their own like query language, and then you basically provide a mapping to the backend thing that you're integrating with to like push down queries into the backend. So I'll hopefully have this out soon, but I have like starting to work on like a Foundry integration for that, for like objects, and then also just like the other sort of like types in the system that are, you know, users and like data sets and whatever, that kind of stuff, like write bindings for those also. But yeah, the idea is you'd then be able to like write this product code in a way that it's kind of like doesn't really matter what's behind it as long as it like conforms to this shape, and then like actually be able to give people that interoperability of like writing applications in this language.
It'd be really cool to see like in the future if that does evolve into something where you can compose applications from server objects. You know, that like to me that's really the kind of holy grail of it all. There's been attempts I don't know if they know they're trying to solve this with React server components, but like at the end of the day, it is, I think, where they're trying to get to, but it was a different problem statement they were trying to solve. I think it was more around performance with React server components and like limiting the amount of JavaScript that gets pushed down. But like, if you could compose apps from server components, there's you eliminate a huge amount of the complexity, and you could actually go much, much, much faster and focus on your applications, like UX being, you know, much more streamlined, easier to like build, kind of like more like Workshop, where I'm not resolving all these problems in Workshop every time I start a new app. It just knows how to work with ontology objects and object sets, you know? So you get this benefit of rapid composition, whereas like in the programming world today, we don't really have anything like that. And there really would need to be this new kind of layer that would figure out how to do that effectively. No one's been able to agree on that in the past. But maybe we transition to talk about a little bit just about like strategic partnerships you have with Palantir and Anduril. I don't know how this other company, Heising, I think is how you pronounce it.
Heising, yeah, they're the
Heising. All right, yeah, that's former Palantir as well, right? Heising AI, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's basically
Robert Fink, I think.
Yeah,
is the guy. Yeah. What's these strategic partnerships look like for you guys, and what are the advantages you're kind of getting out of them?
Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to the like Valinor model of like, again, they're Anduril and Palantir, like that VC scale company going after these huge programs. They have these huge platforms. And I think we're pretty happy to like be able to build components that like interoperate and work on top of those platforms.
Are they kind of like your first stop from a customer perspective, where you get access to them to like discuss product market fit or how your product can help or be embedded in their platforms?
I think it's definitely like, I think we've definitely had conversations with them about like, yeah, what like is stuff that would be interesting for us to do that like you're not tackling for XYZ reasons. Like, again, because maybe it's not big enough or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely been one aspect of it. And then I think it's also just like great, like distribution for some of these products and components that we have, or again, like Streamline as an example, right? It's like, it's sort of like built-in distribution for this product that we're building on top of like all the other benefits of it being easier to build for XYZ reasons. And I think a good model in general will be like that sort of thing where like, again, Anduril has like a similar kind of like their software lattice layer is like, again, trying to be this like, I think similar like common operating picture for like these different like autonomous systems that you have that are all kind of like, again, reading and writing data into this like sort of central place so that you can again have these and I think they build all their hardware products to kind of like natively integrate with that, but like we can kind of do the same thing, right? Like, if we build like a drone or whatever, right, we can build that sort of integration with Anduril. And so like someone in the Anduril user interface can like task a drone with a task that like we built, right? And it can sort of like interoperate with their software layer, but like, and not be like specific to it, but like be able to kind of interoperate with it, and which is great for both just like distribution of the product and it's sort of actually being useful to the customer, right? Rather than like, again, like for a drone to be useful, and sensors to be useful, right? They need to be like actually hooked up to stuff, right? And I think there's this like problem in general of the government. They have like a zillion sensors, like defense specifically, of like they have so many sensors, but they're like not like pointing to anything. And so it's like what problem are you solving? Is it actually useful? So I think it's a great opportunity for us to like actually make products that are useful by like pushing the data into places where it like can actually be operationalized.
Does Streamline like provide, like, is the intent here, like you had mentioned, you can task a drone out of Anduril and you're speaking the same concepts, like you're not tightly coupled in the data model that has to happen there. As part of Streamline's implementation, the intent to be like, let's agree on common like definitions of things and shapes of things such that we can more efficiently throughout the, whether it's this drone or this, targeting system or this other thing, more efficiently task things without having to have this like tight coupling between them?
No, I think we definitely want you to be able to like speak the language of your thing. Like the intent of Streamline is more like whatever shape of data that you care about, how do we just like help you capture and structure that data from wherever it lives, like with a particular focus on like where it's hard right now to do that, which again I think is the sort of like public facing sort of workflows that we talked about, where it's like hard to push that capturing and structuring out like to those users. And then also on the like mobile offline kind of stuff where similarly it's like hard to push that structuring kind of out to those users. So like I think we're pretty ideally agnostic to like shapes of data. I think something we would like to be agnostic to also is the actual like operating system under it. Like right now we're just integrated with Palantir because like we have this partnership. I obviously know how to work with it because I work there and I understand it really well. I think ideally we are just agnostic over like any like object relational layer versus necessarily just like a Foundry. So you could plug it into, a Salesforce or, some other system like that like some government agency is using. I think we could even get it to like work on top of just like a Postgres or something also, right? Like if that made sense. But I think we're focused on these like big operational systems where like a lot of these like critical government institutions are like actually kind of like doing their operations, but where they struggle to like actually like get that data that is missing from the system because it's just like hard to capture right now.
Let's talk about applications of Streamline. Like, what are the problem statements you're focused on specifically? Offline environments are out of reach to actually address for a lot of companies. They stitch together band-aid solutions to try and get that. Major one we talk to a friend about all the time is in and around mining operations, where they have gone to great lengths with drones and cables to try and get some level of connectivity established, and then people driving to places where they can't get internet access. Just absolutely nuts to try and get some level of data flow to the edge. It sounds like that's what you guys are primarily focused on, but would love to hear other examples.
No, I think that's going to be a big one for us. Yeah, just like being able to push out both like writes and like some amount of like obviously you also need like
reads when you're out there also, which is like kind of where it gets hard, right? It's like, it's not that hard to just do like offline writes, right? It's like, you just write it down, put it in a database on the phone or like in whatever data storage on the phone. The hard part is when you get to like reads where it's like, you want to be able to read your writes in some way, right? But then you also need to like sync with the sort of like the sort of main system or other peers or whatever later. Like that's where it kind of gets, the architecture kind of gets trickier. I don't know if we want to
like how do you merge all those updates, right? Like what's the right merge strategy?
Yeah. And like on that, I mean, there's like a bunch of, I don't know if this is coming off if we don't want to keep going in the technical stuff here, but there's like a ton of different ways to think about that also. And again, similar, like people exploring different parts of the solution space. And I think the approach that I'm sort of most bullish on for us is this sort of like state-based like CRDT approach and won't do a full like CRDT thing, but the idea is like, how do you create data structures that can kind of like automatically merge with each other? So like if I do some right and you do some right, like we share state with each other, like we both like converge to the same state. And this idea is used in like document editors and that sort of thing. But honestly, it's like, I think it's a really good sort of architecture for a lot of the things that people are doing with offline data capture, where it's like probably in a lot of cases what I'm doing is like, I'm not doing like a business process out in the field. I'm like writing something down and like also want to read it in the context of other things, I think is like largely what you want to do when you're like out there, whether you're doing like surveys or like you're sort of like, it's this focus on like kind of like capturing the data. Something I'm pretty excited about is like kind of actually how we've figured out how to like integrate that nicely with Foundry. We're actually taking a super similar approach to Supabase. Posted this thing the other day, and it's funny because we have like a super similar idea of like, we basically, it sounds like you're not, maybe you saw this post also, but like basically what they do is they keep like an extra like CRDT property on the like database table. And we kind of landed on something like super similar that I came up with kind of a couple months ago. I'll maybe like share my screen here actually. It's like, because I was trying to make it as like seamless as possible to like actually be able to set up like the data to be able to sync, right? I don't want it to be this like something that a non-technical user like can't actually do. And so the way that we do sync is actually, I have this idea of we're actually like using interfaces a little bit. So I have this interface that is like this like write syncable interface. And so it has like one property on it. It's literally just like a CRDT property. Okay. And then basically, so if you want to make an object type syncable, you basically, all you have to do is just like, I would be like, cool, I want to make this event type syncable or something, right? I just go to interfaces, wherever that is, and I implement this new interface and I make it syncable. And I just say like, cool, this is just going to be like a edit only property, confirm. And then I would save this. And then this thing is now syncable. And then we basically have like there's a couple, and then there's like two functions and one action that sort of like help drive the sync. And so we have a like push action, which basically like takes like a list of like diffs that it can then actually like merge into your ontology. And then it kind of like merges the CRDT property and then kind of like splats out the actual data onto like the properties. So it can like be used operationally in your Foundry. And then on the other side, we have two like functions. So one is this,
how many different data types can that work against?
Just anything. Basically all it has to do is it just has to be able to, as long as it implements this like syncable interface, your thing can now like sync is the idea. And obviously it's going to be like, it's only really going to work for object types where like you don't want to be doing like other actions on them or whatever. But I think for so many of these like offline things, like it really is, I just want to like write something down and be able to read it also offline and then be able to like back. The other two functions that we use for the sync system are this like get version. So this is basically a way that like the client can basically ask the server like, what do you have that I'm missing? And also what do I have that you're missing? Like it's basically how you can do that. I figure out like what diffs need to be sent both ways. And then that's how we actually like push the like minimal set of diffs across the wire. Calculate on the client, like what's the minimal set of diffs we need to send over. And then also this pull function, which basically does the reverse, sort of like I send you my like version vector and then you figure out on the server on like just literally a Foundry function, what are the set of diffs that I need to send down to you to kind of get you up to date.
In the client context, like are you building your own custom clients, or like I know that they recently announced Edge Ontologies. Are you using Edge Ontologies at all as part of that?
I don't know exactly what's going on with that stuff. I think like It seems like that's more the like peering thing, which again I think is more like this like they seem to have this
They're
like
trying to solve the same problem of occasionally connected clients and syncing updates. I've seen it used in the commercial context for fleet management of like rental cars, where you have like spotty internet connectivity around airports, right? And they're doing scans, and so you have this same problem, like what updates, do you have, and what updates do I need as they get connected back? And so this problem of occasionally syncing updates across occasionally connected clients, there's a common set of problems that they're addressing. I was just wondering, like, if on the client side you're able to reuse those same functions that you've got defined in the ontology, or like, are you writing additional logic on the client side?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have our own the Streamline app where like we're using this, but I think something that is interesting is like I will probably just like it's not actually doing that much. Like I will probably like I actually already have the CRDT sort of implementation that I have, just like I have that open source. The like actual like Foundry integration part of it like isn't really doing that much. Like I'll probably just open source also, like hopefully in a way that people could just like marketplace or something. There's no reason you couldn't also use it as like an SDK to like build their own sort of like very custom apps to be able to like do the same sort of syncing that we're doing. I think would be like a great outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's this common client library that you could install, and then it's automatically set up to work with the Foundry. Essentially, server components or server objects you're building with these sync properties and interfaces. That'd be really. Do you think that unlocks anything, any use case I have like that needs sync? If I had those two components, the client side library and the interface and functions that you have here?
I mean, I think it unlocks anything where you, again, I think there's kind of like a multiple aspects of the like sync problem where it's like, I think what this kind of solves is the like, there's a bunch of things that are like related, but like a little bit orthogonal. And I think, like, and you might like compose these different things. Like, I was sort of talking about like the TANstack DB stuff before of like how that kind of like lets you write like that your product code and like the queries for your app in a way that it's sort of agnostic. But like you could imagine even like, and there's sort of a core primitive in like the TANstack DB of like your like collections. And you could imagine just instead of having a collection that's backed by like a like server Foundry object, server connection, like querying Foundry object, it's almost more like just querying the local database. And then in the background, there's something else that's like doing that sync between the local database and the Foundry. Like this is kind of just solving the like making it really simple to like turn like object types into make them like offline capable, basically.
I'd love to unpack this or frame in the sense of like actual business application. Like let's start with military here. Is it strictly around drone technology then?
No, not at all. I mean, like I think something we would love to do is like the type of use case I think was great for like military stuff is like I think they have these like types of surveys. They call them like 9 lines or whatever, right? These like I'm going out and doing some site survey, right? Of like I'm on some remote island and I'm walking around and like taking pictures of sites and being like writing notes about them of like what are the routes in and out and like figuring out like what asset am I going to like place here or whatever, right? Like going out like doing those sorts of surveys again where you may like probably don't have great internet, of being able to like do those sorts of workflows of like out surveying, but also again, not just like the rights, but also being able to like on a map, I could see like, oh yes, like I already did this survey over here, right? Like you need to be able to do those reads to know like what I need to do next or like.
But I'm thinking more like if you have many different drones flying around with intermittent connectivity, wouldn't this be a more applicable?
Yeah, the entire battle space in a lot of ways has intermittent connectivity problems, right? So
yeah, I don't know if we're going to be the best ones equipped to solve that one. There's probably other people that are thinking about that there. It's definitely not like our focus right now, but
if you're trying to keep track of what's happening in the real world and the state of think of the state of every person or the state of every person's device or the state of material and movement, you're going to have this problem of intermittent connectivity and like how do you sync those things, but you can't just take the device offline. You can't take the person offline. You know what I mean? Like they're going to continue to accumulate data and attributes as they continue to operate. So you always have this like sync problem. I think in the context of the commercial space, it's an interesting problem around like you have airports, you have mining operations, you have remote well operations, you have all kinds of like things that go on in the commercial space where this is problematic. But even in just the consumer space, I'm riding the subway, and like, lose connectivity, right? And so that gets back to like the progressive web application case. What I'm interested in is a categorical solution to it, right? So it's such that we solve all the problems around just not only how do I keep clients in sync with servers and servers in sync with clients, but like how do I effectively build a better state management system for applications such that I can compose these things faster? It really feels like we've kind of not really been able to solve this in the client space, like in the React and Vue world.
We're kind of circling around a lot of the right ideas. And again, I think what I'm bullish on is like having like a language that we can express product code in. But then I think on the like actual sync side, I think it is sort of like a bit application dependent of like which, I think there's like different solutions that will just depend on the use case. And so again, I think like for sort of like survey use cases, I think like these like state-based CRDTs is kind of a great approach. I think for other types of use cases where you like need something more transactional, like you probably have a bit of a different approach, and you do more of the like server reconciliation kind of thing of like, it does sort of depend if like your domain is a bit more like action, like transaction based, or more just like bag of properties shaped. I think it kind of like you might like reach for a different thing there.
But can you think like can you think of every transaction as being supportable by a sync? Like you can make syncable properties across all of these objects and create a in-memory. Imagine if you like had a bunch of server objects spun up in a bunch of micro VMs, and you had an index across them, and you just simply, when you perform a transaction, are doing an optimistic update on the server state, and eventually that gets synced back into a system of record. But that fundamentally looks the same as any other sync operation, So it's just really like a matter of like, oh, I have to write these rows of data, is really I have to update these properties on a bunch of server objects that are sitting in a micro VM somewhere. I change those properties, and those get written back to database records like through a write through. To me, like they're the same, right? Like sync and transactions fundamentally, if you're just talking about updating properties, are the same.
I think the thing that's tricky is like when you just like for offline stuff of like, how do you like, what is the user? Honestly, it's like, what does the user experience end up looking like? Where it's like, if it's more transaction based, it's like where then that whole set of transactions could fail. It's kind of like, you kind of would have to be a lot more careful about like, let's say I sent a bunch of transactions to the server and then they failed. Do I just like roll that back on the client, or do I have to like somehow present but what if they had a bunch of like transactions that were like dependent on each other? Like, how do I actually like present the conflicts in some reasonable way to the user to resolve? I think is like why that gets really tricky. Where again, I think like the interesting thing about the like, you're right that they're like similar, but yeah, the interesting thing about like just deciding to use the like state-based kind of like assuming it's more the bag of properties thing is you're almost like saying like that's not really not really my problem. Like I'm not going to think about that hard, and kind of just like only sort of using it for use cases there where like, again, you are okay with like maybe the end result being a little bit weird, but like things mostly being okay.
The point being is you do optimistic updates today, right? Like that's probably the most common strategy I'm seeing in most of the applications where transactions matter. You're still taking on the burden of rollback, and that you have to resolve updates that fail, right? So like there's already that problem. But if we just completely take that problem off the client, right, and move it to a server where the actual transaction processing happens as a result of property manipulation on a server object, right? This is going to trigger that same workflow, but just in the server space, not in the client space, right? Then you turn transaction handling into property updates across a range of objects that must be orchestrated, through the server rendering engine, right?
Yeah, and so that's basically like the approach that like we talked about this a little bit, but like Zero, this new project, takes is like exactly that approach of like this server reconciliation. And they interestingly, like, I don't know, they actually have on the Zero docs, they have a really good page about like offline and like why they actually support offline reads, but like don't support offline writes. And there's like a good like mini essay on there about like why it's hard and like all the different like things you need to think about. So it's like I think there's reasons why it's hard to get to like like you said, a categorical solution for that stuff that I think that essay is maybe a good reference for and better than I'm gonna sort of be able to expound on right now.
What about a demo?
Yeah, I was just to say, I heard we're gonna do our first live demo on Code and Connor here. So
let's go. Demo gods be with us. Let's go.
Let me pull us up here. Imagine I'm like some commercial healthcare organization, and I need to do some sort of whatever type of healthcare. Maybe it's mental health, doesn't matter. Like imagine I'm some commercial healthcare organization, and I want to like just have some like basic way to like do like initial patient intake or something like that. And I probably have some, I can throw together some sort of like object type in my like Foundry instance to be able to track that. So imagine I have some sort of like object type to track these sort of like patient intake responses that I care about. So, maybe to start, I just want someone's like name, email, phone, that sort of stuff, like an ID photo, maybe like a list of prescriptions and like an address or something. So, I will have had some action to sort of like submit that data. And so the thing Streamline is going to help us do is like actually like expose this action to the sort of general public basically really quickly. So I'm going to pop over to Streamline. I'll start throwing together a new form for this. So I'll make like a patient intake form. And so like forms in Streamline are, similar to like the action form in Foundry are going to like always be targeting some sort of action type. So I'm going to connect it to this patient intake response action. And then I'm going to start throwing together a little form here. So I'm going to like quick add like my name, email, phone parameters. I'm going to just like call this like a personal information page. I'm actually going to make this email an email input and this phone one a phone input. And like what that's going to do on, it won't do like the most on desktop, but like on mobile, right? Like if I have an email, it's going to push it down into being like an HTML email type and tel type, right? So on mobile, right, I get like an @ symbol on the keyboard. On email and phone, I get like the sort of like telepad input. Got another page here. I'm going to like gather an address. And so I'm actually going to add like a special element for that. And so I'm going to bind this to my particular parameters. Postal code can be zip. I'm just going to do US only because I'm a US healthcare organization. Then I'm going to do your address. Sweet. And like similarly, I got the core of like autocomplete kind of stuff that you get. Nice stuff. You go with HTML here.
And are all the fields like being bound to the action itself?
Exactly. So I basically like, if you see, I bound these like street address to my like the right parameter in my action, if that makes sense. And then we can also turn on, I'm not going to do this for this one, but I can, you can turn on like Google Maps kind of autocomplete here. So, I could type in like my address or whatever, and then I'll get, it's a little slow sometimes because we're doing the egress through Foundry, but that'll kind of like fill out all the fields sort of like in one swoop, if that makes sense. Like you've seen in those sorts of inputs before, but I'll turn that off for now. And then I'm going to add another page. And then
we can imagine like a property manager that works with a large real estate company. Let's imagine they have to like put in open spaces for lease all the time. Let's imagine I want to consolidate those systems onto Foundry as part of this. Now I have this capability for my people doing leasing. They can rapidly assemble this, but it's going to work with Foundry, right? It's going to like be powered by the Foundry data model.
Exactly.
That's incredible, because if you can create customized solutions that still get you to that core state that you need,
exactly,
you can distribute this out to the a global,
and it's public, right? Like you can actually release this publicly. Whereas in Foundry, you can't do that. There is no public.
We're going to release it publicly. We're going to publish this to you in like a couple seconds after I finish building this. But so here I'm going to, now let's say I want to like take in a list of prescriptions because I'm a healthcare org. And so I'm actually going to add like a list element here. And then inside of this list element, I'm going to put, because I have a list of prescriptions. So you see this list is basically bound to my like prescription, which is a list parameter, like a array parameter. And then in here, I'm going to bind this to like the current scope, which basically means because it's like a list of object reference parameters. And so here I get to I can make this like an object combo box, or here I'm going to show you like an interesting one where I can do like an object drill down. And so what this is doing is this sort of like hierarchical kind of input that you've maybe seen in different types of applications before. And this is where it sort of like starts to shine, that like building on top of an object relational layer, because I can actually like sort of just like quickly like configure like a traversal of those kind of links. So here I'm going to like take in, basically what I'm trying to enter in is like an NDC code, which is like sort of like a pinpoint identifier to like an exact like drug package in the United States that comes from the FDA. And so if you see, if I add an element here, initially it's just going to give me like a sort of search on top of those like drug package object type that I have. But what I'm actually going to do is follow a step, like an ancestor, up to my like drug product object type. And so then I'll actually get to like select that first. So I could select like a Lipitor or whatever, right? And select that. And then I'm going to be able to select like the package to actually like pinpoint to like the exact thing the exact object reference I was looking for. And here, this isn't particularly helpful. So what I'm actually going to do is swap the label property to be the package description. And then you see, so now I have,
you could see that useful in a lot of different areas, right? Like maybe I'm filtered, maybe I first want to go to, properties in a specific location. Then I want to drill down into size, that, that price range, whatever.
you have some kind of like hierarchy of object types.
Exactly.
Like the idea is I can like express that as just like links in this drill down, and then to be able to help like the user pinpoint exactly what they're looking for, and be able to like very carefully like only expose, like I don't want to expose like my whole ontology to be able to be readable by the public. I want to expose like that very narrow query. And so we're very like careful to do that, of like you submit basically like when the front end is actually making the query, it's actually submitting not just like an ontology query, it's submitting this like very, very like I'm making this exact query from this particular like element in this form, and then the server can figure out like, are you actually allowed to do that or not? Like based on the element that you're requesting this from. So this would be how I get a list of prescriptions. I'll just like name this. This is like my prescriptions. Maybe I won't even have a label on that. I'll just do, this is my prescriptions. Sweet. And then I'm going to add another page. And then here I'm going to grab sort of your just like identification photo. So I'm also going to do like a quick ad here to grab your photo. Maybe I'll throw like a little like alert in here. It's like, we need your identification. So
does it actually perform ID verification, or is it just to capture the photo?
No,
right now?
I mean, but the cool thing is it's like at the end of the day, like it's an action, right? So like this could be a function action where like you actually build that sort of logic yourself, right? Again, we're just like trying to be like a really quick way to like spin up the interface, and then you can, again, because we're building on like a system like this, you can kind of do whatever you want in the background. Sweet. So I'm going to save this, publish it. You can see like now this is like my current like live revision of this form because I just published it. We're going to pop over here. We're actually going to make this public. You'll see here I have like a bunch of warning. We have like a bunch of like workflows around like actually making data public and making sure that you've like completed training and stuff to be actually able to do this, because we don't just like want anyone doing this in like in sort of government agencies in these secure contexts. But I'm going to say that I've like completed the training that I needed to do here. Sweet. And then this is actually just a QR code. I will pop this open, and you could like literally just like open this on your phone, and this form will be live and you can submit data through it. I don't know if we want to like do this real quick right now from people's phones, but here, maybe I'll do it on mine. You guys can welcome.
Yeah, pull it up.
But I'm going to go fill this out on my phone.
And Connor, like I could see a whole range of intake problems. Like, I mean, we gave the real estate example, but there's other ones like employment, right? Like, oh, I want people to be able to apply for positions, right? And that I want to keep track of that. Yeah, exactly. Events, all like event registration. So if we want to start a conference and we want to use because like Foundry actually has, I think, in the marketplace a conference ontology, and like you can do like events through it and scheduling, like a basic scheduling thing for events. But you can start thinking of like, oh man, well, all these intake things that we can now do, it opens the range of use cases that generally would be restricted in an organization or be hard to construct. Because if I was to do this manually, I'm building these small React applications for every use case, right? Over and over. That's a huge amount of engineering resources that go into that.
Yep. So I just submitted one here. And then I pop over, again, these are just objects, right? So if I go over to here in Object Explorer, I'll like see this one that I just submitted. I just took a picture of my keys that you'll see. It's not my ID, I lied. But so you want to do some actual validation there. But so yeah, like again, this is now
hook it up to AIP, hook it up to automate, perform my identity verification checks.
And that's another great example of like where I didn't need to build the thing and my cost structure can be different, right? Like all these existing form products, they build like they have to build like an automations layer into the product. And it's like, cool, mine is just adding a button that says create automation.
Right.
I link you out to automate. And my job ends there, right? Like, so I can focus on like more of like the things that actually kind of differentiate like this product in particular, right? Of like making the forms really like accessible and like, you know, like a lot of like care to be taken there, right? Of like, it's like something I've been like nerding out on recently of like,
or just getting an intake form done in minutes instead of having it to take weeks because an engineering team has to go spin it up.
Exactly. Yeah. In general, but there's like so deep you can go on like forms in particular. And I think like, you know, HTML gives you such a good foundation, but there's still so much to like do on top of that. Like I learned recently about like an HTML like output element. I didn't know that existed, but that's basically built for like screen readers to read out. Like if you have certain inputs, you can actually like wire them up like to the output element, and then the like,
Oh, cool.
how it knows how to like that those are like, you're actually like declaring in HTML like the dependency between those things so that like screen readers understand it. Like field set elements get read out by screen readers in a very particular way, where like it reads the like legend of the field set element before it reads out like the label of each field. So it's like there's just like a ton to get like of like depth you can get on that stuff, and so can like focus on like, you know, continuing to like build out that stuff versus like, again, I don't need to build automations or SSO or usage-based pricing, right? I can just sort of like pass those problems off to the platform and be able to just like really focus on like, again,
for operations, like this is big, you know, like Connor, you can think of a lot of operational use cases already probably that have these consumer facing intake problems that today would be hard to do in Foundry. You'd have to build an OSDK application to bridge that gap. So the citizen engineer is literally sitting there and responsible for it, has to now have this dependency on engineering, which means it's probably never going to get done.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's huge application in and around inventory, in and around logistics, customer facing opportunities. Love the one that you mentioned, Dorian, around real estate and leasing and doing things on site. Anything you can drive the latency down there could likely lead to better unit turnover, particularly in the residential sector, but also commercial real estate. So
you're unblocking people so they can solve their own problems. It's just really cool.
I had been sort of talking about these like site survey kind of use case, right? So imagine I have some like site survey object type that has a bunch of, you know, stuff that I care about. And again, the important thing that I did here is like implemented this like rights syncable interface and added the CRDT property. And then I can go into, this is actually like a secret tab in Streamline right now because
not anymore.
But this idea of how do I spin up these like mobile workspaces. So what I'm doing here is like I can create I already have one, but I would be like, you know, create a workspace. In here I was doing like some sort of like Florida site surveys, and then I basically would add like the object types that I care about that need to be, again, syncable. But so I would add this object type, create this workspace. And then I can actually just like get this on my phone. And then I would scan this. And then basically like that's like what's connecting. Basically the reason it's QR code is just like to connect my Ontology to my phone. So I don't need to like sit there and type in my Foundry URL. And then so that pulls up in the Streamline app, which I can kind of show you what this looks like. So basically, again, I can like on my phone, it like downloads the set of workspaces that I care about. And then I kind of, you can see here, I have like, I just hit like sync. And so that's actually like running that sync engine that I showed you earlier to like do that pull function to like, again, and here it pulled down everything. Okay. And then here I can give people like, again, like a limited like read and write. So I can like pull up these objects on a map. They're here because they have some like geospatial property. I can also like, it's almost like mini object explorer plus like reads and writes. Okay. And so I can like pull these objects up. And like, if you see, I'm like on airplane mode right now, so I can like create a new survey. And again, it's using like that same like forms engine that we've built out to like actually power the forms in here. So here I'm going and like filling something out like on mobile. But again, I'm offline here.
Is this React Native or like what did you build this in?
So it's a React Native app, and then actually what we're doing, HTML is just kind of like goated for like this stuff. So we're actually embedding a web view for just the forms. Because it's just like HTML is like so much better than React Native for forms. Because it's just like HTML gets so much right in terms of just like keyboard input and stuff like that, of like the arrow keys. Like it's just actually like so hard to rebuild that stuff in React Native. So we're actually like using the best, like actually kind of landed on like web is actually best there. But then the rest of the app, is a React Native app.
Are you using your own SDK? Like I think you published an SDK for sync for this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I have like exactly, yeah. So I have these couple of functions, these sync functions that's sort of powering this. So it can like, again, pull in your Ontology objects. But then again, you can do these like reads and writes, like totally offline, and like to do these sorts of surveys.
OSDK-React. I think I actually have it up here on GitHub, but if people
it's actually a little different. That's like I've done a bunch of different explorations of ideas here. That was a library where it's more like it's just doing some of that like automatic client state management of like you like
Okay.
a use objects hook and a use action hook, and then it can kind of like figure out like it's sort of, again, some of that stuff that Workshop does where it's like, oh, I did an action, and so it's a little more advanced than Workshop where it actually does some of the filters on the client side. So like when an action edit comes back around, it can like figure out where to insert it in a list, because like the client actually understands the like where clause and the sort. So it can figure out, oh, that new object that just came around, I need to like insert it into here, and I don't need to like make a whole round trip back to the server to do another query to kind of refresh that. Cool. But again, that's where like I think TanStackDB actually kind of like solves this problem like better. So I'm actually more bullish on just like integrating with that. And then again, I've done like a couple different explorations here. I also have in that same repo, like I built like a GraphQL layer over your ontology. So you can like spit out a GraphQL schema that's like for your ontology. That was like a sort of another like version of exploring the same idea of how do we just like make it way better to like build apps on top of this stuff. But the actual sync stuff is I actually have that like in a different repo. I have like just the CRDT kind of logic. And then right now I have like the functions are still just sitting in my Foundry, but I'll probably just wrap those up also in that repo as like here, you can take these functions and like install them in your own Foundry and like also get the same sync engine that I have. So if people want that.
Really cool. Really cool. Well, this is pretty cool. I mean, like think about all these capabilities you're unlocking for public facing applications. I see immediate applications for in the enterprise for the intake process. The syncing part is a little bit more nuanced. I think there in the enterprise context, there's certain types of operations that we spoke about earlier, from mining to some of these other things where like airport operations and stuff like that, where you have this problem. Really, really cool. And I'm excited to like start playing with this. If I wanted to like mess around with this, what do I do? Like, do I sign up at the site, or what do I do?
Mess up with Streamline?
Yeah.
Get in touch. I mean, the way that works right now is you so I can actually show you the way it looks in Marketplace. So we have we're using the new like Marketplace Apollo integration stuff. So if I go to Marketplace, you'll see we have there is like a remote Streamline store. So basically you would get this to show up in your Foundry. There's two products right now. It's basically the Streamline product, and then also the like we have like I separated out the Google Maps integration just because like you might want to install Streamline, but you don't want to set up a source for like, if you're not going to do egress or whatever. I don't like the way sources work in Marketplace right now is like, you always have to like you have to like create the source yourself. And so so I sort of split this out. So like the core product doesn't necessarily do any egress. So you can like just feel comfortable installing it. You can like install this separate Google Maps integration if you want. And that powers like the autocomplete that I showed you before, and like and this sort of like address element. But yeah, so you get all our object types of like, there's Streamline forms, and again, like the actual app itself is built on Foundry too, right? So there's Streamline form revisions, there's just sort of all the actions and functions to like power our app. But yeah, basically you get in touch with us, and then we like get this store like whitelisted on your stack. You send us an enrollment ID, and then we do an install, and then you're off for the races. Is kind of how it works.
Game on. I'm going to hit you up for install. Let's do it, man.
Well, thanks, guys. Today we covered Valinor and its constellation of mission-aligned products, Streamline, one of those product companies, structured right back even in disconnected offline environments, and Ontology native data capture. We also saw our first live demo. Rob, thank you so much for your time, man. Where can people find more out about you and Streamline?
Thanks for having me, guys. You can find more about, if you go to valinor.co, you can see like Streamline and our other product companies on there. We actually haven't done, I think by the time this video goes live, we'll have had done the actual product launch. And so the Streamline logo will not be grayed out anymore, and you'll be able to follow a link to the actual product page. And then you can also find me on the internet, my website, bobbyfids.tech. That's my blog page that I trying to write more these days. So you can find more stuff about me there and follow links from there. And
future episodes coming, more and more guests of partners, customers, content creators, Palantir, other tech companies, you name it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.